Rants. Like and subscribe. And y'all see, we going back down the Hillman with it. Y'all already know, hey, it's back to school week. Some of you guys kids are starting school. You know, if you got college kids out here that they started already. So we back at Hillman. Okay, this is a classic episode rant, right? We early in the game too, right? This is a season 2, episode 20. And you clicked on the thumbnail and you're like, oh yeah, Rance he's sticking to his word, right? Yeah, this is no means no. Yeah, it's still pervert week. Yeah, that's right, pervert week. Creep week, I guess. As a matter of fact, grab one of those multicolored condoms that they used to promote in the early 90s when they used to promote safe sex to us. Remember those days? Grab one of those and place it over your left eye in tribute, okay? So I creep, yeah, just keeping it on the down low when nobody else supposed to know, yeah. Yeah, man, it's rants, man. No means no, okay? Classic episode, right? And in the beginning of this episode, right, they actually cut this part out, but when they first aired this episode, Bill Cosby gave a speech about how no means no and everything, right? And I really wish we had that footage because I could do a rant about that alone, right? But nonetheless, though, we're going to stay on topic and we're going to, you know, break down the episode and everything. I don't know if you guys remember this one, right? This is when Freddie fell for the baseball star. I believe his name was Garth, right? Baseball star. But what Freddie didn't know was Garth was making plans for Freddie. See, I hate to break down another song, but Garth was making plans. Oh, yeah. Garth was making plans for Freddie. Yep, because you already know, right? And those plans was very pervert plans. Perverted, I guess, right? Creep plans, right? Because this episode is no means no. So you already know what we talking about. And I know you guys remember this one. But I'm selling it. And I need to be telling it, okay? So let's get into the actual episode, right? And we see Freddie walk in the pit and she's happy. She says, we destroyed Hampton 17-2. It was a massacre. It was beautiful. And Jaleesa says, Freddie, I hate baseball. And Freddie says, you wouldn't say that if you was there. Garth hits 3 dingers. That's what ball players call home runs. And Jaleesa says, you know what I hate more than baseball? Baseball fans. And Freddie says, when Garth hits a dinger, he stands at the plate and kisses it goodbye. He's so adorable. And Jaleesa says, there's like 9 men on the team. Like, what are the other 8 men doing? Selling peanuts? And Freddie says, look, I'm just happy that my friend did well. And Jaleesa says, oh, Garth is your friend now. And Freddie says, yeah, just like you. And Jaleesa says, I don't see my name doodled all over this program though. And Freddie says, men and women can be friends. Garth is my friend from astronomy class. And Jaleesa says, oh, that's why there's stars in your eyes. And Kim walks over there, right? And Freddie says, Kim, could you please tell Jaleesa that men and women can be friends? And Kim says, Jaleesa, men and women can be friends. And Jaleesa says, what, like, do you actually believe that? And Kim's like, no, and walks off, right? And Willie turns around and says, would you like my opinion? Men and women cannot be friends because women do not like beer. And Freddie says, maybe you can't be friends with a man, but I can. As a matter of fact, I'm going to the spring cabaret dance with my friend Dwayne. And Jaleesa says, oh, that's only because your friend Garth didn't ask you. And Walter walks in and he says, Jaleesa, my boy Garth Parks. And ladies and gentlemen, let's just nip this in the bud. That is the biggest red flag, right? You have I don't even know what the correct term is now. Let's say, what, FBA. I guess that's what people say on YouTube, right? FBA male, right? By the name of Garth Parks. Garth. You should have already known. And he's great in baseball, which is cool. It's cool, you know. But I mean, his name is Garth. And with a name like that, you can only like two types of juice. Grape and grapefruit. But let me continue with the rant though. So Walter, he's excited. He's like, yeah, this dude Garth, he can throw the ball, run to the plate, hit the ball, run to center field, catch the ball, and rob himself of a home run. And then he starts to spin around, right? Like he starts to do too much, like as if he's a freshman on campus, you know? And Jaleesa says, you've been watching the Walter Oakes Wide World of Crazy, and leaves, right? But I want you guys to understand something. She's dressed like Mark Cooper from Hanging with Mr. Cooper, right? You guys, I'm going to show you guys a picture later, and that's neither here nor there. I just want y'all to keep that in the back of y'all mind, right? Because I'm going to bring it up again. And that's neither here nor there, right? But we see Dwayne, right? Who plays baseball for Hillman. Yeah, you guys didn't know that Dwayne played D3 baseball. Yeah, D3 baseball, yep. And he says, Freddie, how did you like my sharp single? And Freddie says, you got a base hit? Oh, Garth, hi. And Mr. Gaines, right, he walks out. He can't believe it because Hillman never wins anything, right? And he says, did I just hear those children, right? You boys beat Hampton. And Dwayne says, yeah, we crushed them 17-2 thanks to my home run hitting homie. And Gaines says, wow, we whipped Hampton? The last time that happened, I had hair. Now, I know who got the 17, but who let the 2 in? Like, how did y'all let them get 2? And everybody looks at Dwayne, and Dwayne says, what? The ball hit the wall so high, I have to be Spider-Man to reach it, you know? And Walter says, next game, I'm going to have a wall play right field. And Garth says, look, the sun was in his eyes, you know? And Walter says, that was his excuse when we lost the night game, though. And Dwayne is acting like a baller. He walks to the counter and says, burgers and fries all around. And Whitney walks up and she tries to get in her bed, right? She says, pardon me, Garth. I've watched you play several times. You have the grace of a dancer. Have you ever studied ballet? And Garth says, I took tap when I was 5. Excuse me, Courtney. And Whitney says, Courtney? It's Whitley, you dumb jock. And Garth isn't really tripping off Whitley because he's popular on campus, you know? And he walks out of the pit and he sees Freddie and he tells her, hey, it really helps my game when I see you in the stands. What do you say we go to the spring cabaret dance? And Freddie says, together? And Garth says, better than dancing alone, unless you already have a date. And Freddie says, yeah, Dwayne and I decided to go together. And Garth says, oh, that's okay, maybe next dance. And Dwayne walks up and says, hey, Freddie, you know, when I hit the wall earlier in the game, I hurt my dancing arm. You know, I can Roger, but I can't rabbit. So you two go on and have fun. Don't think about me. So now we see Freddie in her dorm and she's off in her little fantasy world, right? She's thinking about having little baseball kids and whatnot. And Jaleesa walks in. Remember, I told you I was going to bring this back up, right? Is she not dressed like the backup small forward for the Golden State Warriors, Mark Cooper? Look at her fit. She looks like Mark Cooper, the lead from Hanging with Mr. Cooper. Does she not? Yeah, I told you I was going to bring that back up, right? But yeah, Jaleesa walks in and she says, so I hear you're going to the dance with Garth? And Freddie says, Jaleesa, he's such a... And Jaleesa says, good friend? And Freddie says, oh, he's more than that. The way he talks makes me so. And Jaleesa says, friendly. And Freddie says, who's talking about friendship? This man is a hunk. He's more than just a hunk, though. He's a hunk with substance. He looked right through that sea of beautiful women and picked me. Maybe he's a nearsighted hunk. And Jaleesa says, with that batting average, I don't think so. And Freddie says, I know what you're going to say. Remember when you met Dwayne? One step at a time. And Jaleesa says, actually, I was going to tell you jump to it, honey. It's your sophomore year. Go ahead and pop it on a handstand. Do what you want to do. Be who you want to be. Love who you want to love. You know, I was thinking about, you know, munching on that carpet on the late night. You know, this is what Jaleesa said, right? With that Hanging with Mr. Cooper fit, right? And here go Freddie, right? She's like, I wonder what our children will look like, with his brains and my brains and his looks. And then she walks into the door and Jaleesa says, they'll be athletic geniuses that bumps in the walls, right? And Dwayne walks in, right? And he says, yeah, you left your bag at the pit, And Freddie says, thank you. Don't know what planet I'm on. And Jaleesa says, planet Garth. And Freddie steps off, right? And Jaleesa asks Dwayne, she says, does it bother you that she's so out there about somebody else? And Dwayne's not tripping. He says, no, we're just friends. Plus, Garth's a great guy. Was she ever this goofy over me? And Jaleesa says, close. She figured out when, you guys were getting married and how many kids you'll have. I think it was a boy and a girl. And Dwayne was offended. He says, I would have wanted 2 boys, Daryl and Mookie. And now we see Dwayne with them OG Jordan 4s on, right? He's still from Brooklyn too, so he's a Knicks fan, right? And he's repping hard, right? And he's before his time. He's doing the and one style dribbling. Should I explain that? Yeah, see, like back in the day, No, never mind. We ain't even going to touch on that. But you see Garth, he sees Dwayne, he's doing all that unnecessary and one dribbling, right? And he asks, what are you doing? And Dwayne says, if I hadn't hurt my arm, you wouldn't be able to see me. And he takes Garth right to the hole and scores, right? See, Garth isn't all that in basketball, right? He's pretty good in baseball, but not basketball, right? And we see 2 random female students walk in. And one says, let's cool down in here and hit the showers. And the other says, I'll get the mats. And Garth walks over and says, hi, Tammy. And Tammy looks at Garth funny and says, I'll cool down in the shower. And Dwayne, he's catcalling. He says, oh, you look too hot to cool down. That's one body I would love to be a bee to sweat on. And Garth walks over there and he says, that's one ball you can hit out the park every time. And Dwayne, he's curious like any other dude would be, right? Dwayne like, oh, something tells me you played on that field before, my boy. And Garth says, I didn't plan to. Some of us went to a picnic and she came over to help me find a blanket. She was all over me. And Dwayne says, get out of here. And Garth says, yeah. She was wearing a t-shirt and these little red shorts. And when she bent over, and Dwayne says, get out of here. And Garth says, yeah, I should have worn a catcher's mask. That chick scratches like an alley cat. And Dwayne says, ooh, she's kinky too. Get out of here. And Garth says, yeah, once we started, she put up a fuss. They want to do it, but can't give it up. See, it's our job to let them off the hook. Let them think it wasn't their idea. When you're alone with a girl and your hands down her blouse, if she says, ooh, stop, don't tell me you actually stop. And Dwayne says, well, most of the time, I don't like getting scratched. The sight of my own blood freaks me out. And Garth says, buddy, if you want it, you gotta go for it. That's why the sun will always be in your eyes. And before we even continue this rant, because I know what you guys are going to say in the comments, that's Garth Parks, okay? That is not Bruce Leroy, okay? Why would Bruce Leroy be graping on college chicks like Freddie? Freddie don't even wear deodorant. Like, be real, she's cute, but she don't wear deodorant. Bruce Leroy has the glow, okay? So don't get in the comments and say all that. We nipping that in the bud right now, all right? And now we see Dwayne, he's a little concerned and he wants to warn his cute mushroom eating friend Freddie, right? And Miss Letty walks in and says, Dwayne, I need to talk to you about Garth. I'm afraid he's got a little control problem. And Dwayne says, what you hear? And Miss Letty says, oh, I saw for myself. See, I go to the games. I'm not saying Garth doesn't have good stuff, but when he throws the ball, he always flies open like this and shows Dwayne how bad his pitching form is. Then she says, yeah, you see, his release point is all over the place. You can't have any control like that. Tell him to keep his front shoulder closed. Then she throws an apple at Dwayne, right? And she's like, that's a strike in any league. And tell him to drive with his legs. He can put 2 more feet on his fastball. And Dwayne says, well, you got any advice for me? And Miss Letty says, yeah, I guess when you're in the outfield, wear a helmet. And now Kim and Freddie walks in, and she tells Freddie Garth is going to love that dress. And Dwayne says, hey, Freddie, you got a second? It's kind of important. And Freddie says, yeah, so what's so important? And Dwayne asks, is that Garth's cap? And Freddie says, yes. He asked me to wear it for good luck, before the road trip and whatnot. And Dwayne says, like, how well do you know Garth, Freddie? And Freddie says, I think I know him pretty well. And Dwayne says, yes, but how well do we know anybody? Even when we know somebody, do we really know them, or do we know the them they want us to know? And Freddie says, Dwayne, this is so sweet. Are you jealous? And Dwayne says, no, Freddie, I don't want you to go out with this guy. And Freddie says, see, I get it. See, because I was jealous when you went out with Suzanne. Maybe one day we'll feel the same about each other at the same time. Maybe not, but we have something far more special, a true friendship. And Dwayne says, as your friend, I'm telling you, don't go out with him. And Freddie says, why not? And Dwayne says, he wears a catcher's mask. And Freddie says, he's a pitcher. And Dwayne says, this guy is fast. He might be out of your league. And Freddie says, I know I'm from New Mexico, but I don't have a tumbleweed between my ears, Dwayne. I'm a big girl. And Dwayne says, he might try to make you do things you don't want to do. And Freddie says, I know Garth Parks. He's a great person. He's your friend. What you're doing right now is very low. And Dwayne says, you don't know him. And Freddie says, the person I really don't know is you, and walks off. And Dwayne walks over to Walter and says, hey, Walt, you got a second? I need to talk to you about some things. And Walt says, hey, sounds heavy, brother. And Dwayne says, yeah, it is. And Dwayne asks, when you worked in construction and a pretty girl walked by, did you whistle? And Walter says, whistling was the job requirement. The guys wouldn't eat with you unless you did like a ow and a yo mama, what's up? And Dwayne asks, and these women, what did they do? And Walter says some of them yelled back and some of them used sign language, if you know what I mean, right? And Dwayne says, yeah, I was just thinking about guys and how we treat women. And when you were my age and you did a little hoochie and you did a little coochie, like, how was that? And Walter says, didn't your daddy have this talk with you? Like, you're in college, bruh. Like, what's going on? And Dwayne says, Walter, just try to imagine back then. You and your girl, you have the house to yourselves and you're in the den on the couch. The lights are low. Jeffrey Osborne, he's telling y'all that y'all both deserve each other's love. They trying to, your guys are going to woo, right? That it's just the fact that you should be mine. Anything you want, you got to fortify my love. Fortify me. Can you woo? I'm sorry, I get in my mode with that R&B. I apologize, you guys. I apologize to the audience, all right? I'm sorry about that, right? And Walter's like, yeah, I hear you. And Dwayne says, things are getting heavy. She calls for a timeout. And Walter says, yeah, I've been there too. And Dwayne says, her mouth is saying no, but you sure there's other parts of her saying yes. What part do you listen to? And Walter says, oh, her mouth? Then you go outside and take a swim in an unheated pool. And Dwayne says, so it's not my job to get her off the hook or to help her give it up? And Walter says, dude, if you think that, your next job will be pressing license plates. Dude, that's grape. And Dwayne says, no, this isn't some wacko in the bushes with a raincoat. This is you and your girlfriend. And Walter says, if the woman says no, and you don't listen, it's grape juice. Plain and simple. Case closed, 10 to 20, man. But now it's my turn though, Dwayne. Like, let me ask you a question though. Why are we even talking about this? And Dwayne says, look, it's just that guys need to talk about stuff like this. That's all. And walks off, right? And Walter's looking crazy, like, all right, whatever, And now we're at the Spring Cabaret, right? And it's 1990. So I want you guys to know that Johnny Gill, My is playing in that background. You guys already know that. Put on your red dress and slip on your high heels and some of that sweet perfume. It sure smells good on you. You got me saying my. You sure look good tonight. And you're so damn fine. And Freddie's so damn fine. Well, not in that dress. And I'm going to cook that dress, but give me a second because I just gave you guys a single, right? I just gave you guys a solo. So let me get back to the rant, right? And Garth walks up on Freddie and says, Freddie, you look gorgeous in that dress. And Freddie says, thank you. I should have made it shorter. And Garth asks, Freddie, how's your knee? And she says, oh, the swelling's gone down. Should have worn the matching shin guards, though. And Dwayne pops in, right? And let me just say this. Normally on this channel, we would charge him with Peter blocking. Peter blocking. Yep, Peter blocking. We would normally charge him with that. But you guys got to understand, it's pervert week. So Dwayne is actually safe, right? And he says, Garth, just the man I'm looking for. If we hurry, we can catch that live interview with Cal Ripken on ESPN. He's a legend from Aberdeen, Maryland. Plays for the Orioles. Come on, let's go. And Garth says, man, tape it for me. You see, I'm trying to get my Mac on. And Dwayne says, yeah, there's an echo stuck in the VCR. And Freddie asks Garth if he wants to dance. And Dwayne says, oh, I love to dance. And Freddie says, oh, I'm talking to Garth. And Dwayne says, oh, well, you two kids enjoy this last dance, but Coach told me to remind you, lights are out in 15 minutes. And Garth says, but curfew's at 11. And Dwayne says, look, we got a lot riding on this trip. We can't afford to have you dozing off at the mound. Freddie, the night before a game, athletes shouldn't be doing too much cheek to cheeking. And Garth says, man, I'll take a vitamin. And Freddie asks Garth to get some punch so he can walk off, right? And Freddie's blown, right? She's like, Dwayne, what are you doing? And Dwayne says, I'm looking out for my boy. We're this close to the championship. And Freddie says, you will not ruin this night for me. And Dwayne tells her straight up, look, Freddie, this guy's a creep. And Freddie says, you're the creep. And Dwayne's offended. He's like, true? Well, I hope that punch turn into grape juice because you on your own now. And now we see Garth and Freddie looking like an Asian nun in that purple dress. I told y'all I was going to get on it, right? Look like an Asian nun, right? And she's ready to be baptized in grape juice, right? And they're looking at the stars. Remember, they were in astrology class. We already mentioned that, right? And Garth says, look, there's Polaris. That must be the Little Dipper. And Freddie says, I can barely make it out. And they both say probably because the Little Dipper has 3 stars brighter than the 4th magnitude. And Garth says, I know where we can see the stars better. Up at the Overlook. There's no glare from the city lights. And Freddie says, I've never been there, but agrees to go, right? And now they're in the car. And Freddie says, oh, the view is incredible. And Garth says, sure is. The view from above is even better. I'll bring you to the heavens, And Freddie's like, wow, he has a sunroof. Man, this is beautiful. It's like the sky back home in Santa Fe. The stars seem so close you can reach up and grab them. And Garth goes smack at Freddie and kisses her. And Freddie says, oh, that's my first kiss. I mean, here at Hillman. And Garth goes smack at Freddie again and kisses her. And you know where that pitching hand is headed, right? You already know. And Freddie says, Garth, you're probably totally unaware of this, but your hand is on mine. And Garth backs off and Freddie says, thank you. Then he goes smack for a 3rd time, very aggressively, right? This guy is a cheek monster. He wants the cheeks badly. And Freddie says, Garth, stop it. Wait a minute, please. And Garth says, Freddie, you didn't come here to just look at the stars. And Freddie says, stop it, please. And Garth says, oh, you want it rough? I can play that way. And now we're in full grape mode. And out of nowhere, Dwayne jumps on top of that 1st generation Mercury Sable with the sunroof and claws at Garth's face. This gives Freddie enough time to jam her finger in Garth's eye and get out that car. And Dwayne says, go, Freddie, go. Go, Freddie, go. But Garth pulls Dwayne in the car and hits him with a couple jabs, right? We just don't see that part, right? And now Garth is trying to save face. He walks up to Walter and says, Coach, I know I missed bed checking this after curfew, but if you bust anybody, bust Dwayne. He's bounced off too many walls. And Walter asks, well, what did he do? And Garth says, first he says, take Freddie to the dance. Then he follows us to the overlook and starts beating on me. And Walter's like, huh? Dwayne Wayne? And Garth is a manipulator, right? He says, well, it wasn't his fault. Freddie tried to play us against each other. That chick is a tease. You should have heard her. Let's look at the stars. You know the game. They want it, but they need help giving it up. And Walter says, what did you say? And Garth says, they trained to say no. It's our job to let them off the hook. And Walter asks Garth, where did you get those scratches? And Garth says, Freddie, I told you, she puts on a great innocent act. Man, when she gets going, she's an alley cat. Oh man, I'm never going out with her again. And Walter points that bat at Garth and says, oh, you got that right. Your goofy looking ass might not be going out for a long time. And now Walter blown, he says, I can't believe I begged that kid to come to school here. And Lisa says, well, he had his old food. And Whitley says, not me. I knew the minute that grapist called me Courtney, he was a worm. And Kim says, well, I'm glad Freddie had the guts to report Garth to the police. And Miss Letty says, you know, a lot of girls don't. They think if they're on a date, then they're responsible. And Kim says that's what kept Tammy from saying anything. And Whitley says, I'm starting a petition to have that overlook changed into a bird sanctuary. And Freddie walks in and everybody asks if she's fine and everything. And they big up Dwayne, of course. And Dwayne says, she's the real hero. She did great at the police station and at the overlook. If it hadn't been for her, I'd be still mooning the stars. And Walter asks, how's Tammy? And Freddie says, she's pretty shook up. You know, she told the police everything. She went to his room to get a blanket and, you know, I just thought I knew him. And Walter says, at least he's off the streets. And Miss Letty says, you know, date rape is hard to prove. And Dwayne says, but we got witnesses right here. And now Freddie is talking to Dwayne and she asks, how's your back? And he says, you know, next time I get in the car, you know, I'll use the door, right? And he was like, you know, are you all right? And Freddie says, I'll be okay. I think, you know, I should go see a counselor at the student health. And Dwayne says, look, I'm no counselor, but here's the number where we're going to be on the road trip. Call me if you need me. And Freddie hugs Dwayne and says, okay, Dwayne, thank you. Thank you for being my friend, right? And that's the end of the show, right? But this is Rants. This is Randumb Rants, right? Now, what happens to the pervert, Garth Parks, after this episode, right? Well, you guys got to understand, it's the early 90s, right? And he's pretty good in sports, okay? So Garth Parks is never charged with this crime. In fact, Garth Parks transfers to Morgan State and plays baseball for them. And he calms down, right? And he even plays minor league for the Bowie Bay Sox. But see, once a pervert, always a pervert, right? And back in 2000, Garth Parks' career got ended after he got into a wild bar fight with a transsexual in the Baltimore red light district, right? He tried to toss the wrong balls, if you know what I mean, right? But yeah, that Baltimore transsexual cut Garth, and Garth walks with a twitch now, and he has crazy seizures when he smells different things, like such as like cookout food and random fish dishes and like chocolate desserts. Like random things trigger seizures in him, right? But he's a pervert, right? And who will I cover next on Pervert Week? Who knows? My. You sure look good tonight. And you're so damn fine. Randumb Rants, man. Like and subscribe.